Hey everybody, Chris the old-ass retro gamer here. Today I'm back with a sequel to one of my most popular episodes, movies that would have made great video games. I did a video on this topic already where I talked about movies that I wished had a tie-in video game associated with it, but never did. And I was joined by 10 fellow YouTubers who shared their picks as well. So for the sequel, I got 10 more guests, some of whom's channels aren't even associated with video games. So I decided to switch it up a little bit this time.
You're a goddamn genius!
So who is joining me today? Well, that would be the immortal John Hancock, Retro Gaming Maniac, the Viking Gamer, Radical Reggie, Church the Game Grinder, Jason from Corpse Flood Gaming, my friend Charlie from Epic Die Studios, Matt Zion of Wreckless Eating, John Riggs, and Michael B. the Game Genie. So the way this is going to work, just like last time, is 2 guests are going to share their picks, followed by mine. I will have shared 5 by the end of the video, and we would have had 10 guests share theirs. It's going to be an awesome episode. So let's get to it with my first 2 guests, John Hancock and the Retro Gaming Maniac.
The immortal John Hancock here, and today I get to talk about a movie that I'd love for them to have a video game of. I have Big Trouble Little China in my hand, for people that can't see it, and if you're not familiar with it, you need to go see it now. It's got Kurt Russell in it. That's all you need to know about this movie, is it's got Kurt Russell in it. And it's directed by John Carpenter. That's the other thing you need to know. I know that there was some ancient computer game made for this. Let's fast forward like a modern game. So Big Trouble Little China, I think would make a great modern game. If this was to be made into a video game now, it would have to be like the movie and a combination of different types of games. Part of this game would have to be stealth, sneaking people in and out of buildings. I think there needs to be some awesome fight scenes. So part of this game could be like a brawler, that epic battle scene at the end. And so I think you could even have part racing in this game, moving that semi-truck in and out of things. I think that this movie would make a great video game, and my vision for the video game would be a combination of many different types of genres. And so it would have to have dialogue from the movie, even voiceover's fine. I think if done right, this could be amazing. And so that's my thoughts about this. I hope that there's some Big Trouble Little China fans out there. If you haven't seen this, go check it out. It's amazing.
Hey guys, Retro Gaming Maniac here, and one movie I would like to see made into a game is a movie called The Road. Now, if you don't know what The Road is, it's a movie that came out in 2009 starring Viggo Mortensen. And it's a post-apocalyptic movie, and I love those kind of movies. It's basically a story of this father and son, and it's in a future world that's just completely destroyed. There is no plant life, there's no animal life hardly, with the exception of, you know, maybe a random dog or wild dog. People are starving, and because of that, people have resorted to becoming cannibals. So now, not only do you have to worry about just the crazy world that exists, now you have to worry about people. I think it would make a cool game, because we've had games like The Last of Us, which is amazing. It may be very similar to The Last of Us, which I think would be cool, because instead of having creatures and zombies, you'll have humans. And if you've watched The Walking Dead, you know that the worst thing about that show is how bad the people are. The people are the true enemies in that show. It's not the zombies. But I think it would be interesting to see, and especially having the cannibal aspect to it. It's almost like zombies that can think in a way. But anyways, that would be my choice. I think it would play a lot like The Last of Us, which is fine with me. I'm huge into the survival games, you know, H1Z1, DayZ, all those survival games, so I would love to see The Road made into a game.
Awesome picks from both guests. I love it. For my first pick, this one might be the most obvious out of them all, but it's a movie that I am so surprised never got a game tie-in. Bloodsport. Yes, the Jean-Claude Van Damme Kumite flick. I mean, come on, it's about an illegal martial arts competition. That just sounds like it has video game written all over it. Shame on you, video game industry, for not taking advantage. So you would obviously play as Van Damme's character, who has entered this martial arts competition and must fight his way through a number of increasingly difficult opponents, ending up with you fighting against Bolo Young.
Now I break you.
And the way I see it is, it would be sort of like a Street Fighter mixed with Mortal Kombat. There would be illegal moves that you could perform, because illegal fighting competition, yes. Enemies would do it as well, like, you know, you'd have people throwing dust in your face to blind you so that you couldn't see, and they can get a few free hits on you. And as you would progress through the game, you would start to unlock abilities that would help you beat your later opponents. You know, different leg sweeps or roundhouse kicks. Eventually you'd unlock the splits move that Van Damme does, and you can punch someone in the junk. No fireballs, no. At the time the movie came out, the NES was the big console, so I could see it being for that, but I would rather see it for the Super Nintendo. So you can get the better graphics, you can kind of get the Mortal Kombat digitized actors thing going on. Like I said, it was a perfect setup for a video game and nobody took advantage of it. It's a damn shame. It just sounds like a lot of fun. A Van Damme fighting game. The only Van Damme game I remember ever getting was Time Cop. So let's hear from my next pair of guests, the Viking Gamer and Radical Reggie.
Oh, hi, I'm just playing some Golf Story. I didn't see you there. Chris asked, what would be a great movie that you would like to see made into a video game that never got one? And I was thinking, I like Golf Story a lot with the RPG and the sports mechanic. Why not infuse some baseball into that, which is America's favorite pastime, or it used to be. I think Sandlot, the movie, should have gotten a video game. It was made in 1993. They could add some RPG elements into it, have it follow the story a little bit, so you'd have different locations, like you'd have obviously the Sandlot, the cul-de-sac, the awesome pool scene, even the carnival, and maybe the corner store where they buy the baseballs could be integrated into it somehow, and you'd have like various challenges of just not be 100% baseball related. Maybe it'd be like trying to like round up the guys to go play baseball, so you have to go do a couple little side quests to achieve that, to get them to go out and play. Or you could play as like multiple different characters. It'd probably be a shorter game because you don't really want to include Sandlot 2 because that movie's just hot garbage. But I really like Golf Story, and I think Sandlot would make a good RPG.
Hey Chris, thanks for having me on. And I would have to pick as my movie into game, The Leprechaun from 1992, 93, 94, 93. Woodrick Davis, I hope I said his name right. I think he would be the perfect villain for a game, a survival horror game. Basically, you would steal the leprechaun's gold for yourself. You know, you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, you need to come up. And you take his gold, and he pretty much comes after you. The whole thing in the game was you have to survive him, you know, from his onslaught. You have to get away with the gold without being killed. And of course, if he captures you or whatever, or he comes close into contact with you, that's where you have to fight him off or try to run from him. Like basically, like I would think of an idea like he kind of will stalk you, like Resident Evil, not Outbreak, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and Resident Evil 2 with the Mr. X. Basically, he'll follow you around room from room or whatever. So here's an idea I came up with, like if you're hiding in the restroom or something like that, that would be a save room. He could come in, he could possibly attack you while you're in there, but you can hold him off while you save your game. But if you try to wait in there too long without pausing the game, he would appear in there and attack you in there too. So you have to constantly be on the move. And the game would be pretty violent. You know, there'd be violent kills. The leprechaun would be telling you jokes. I mean, like saying like funny jokes and stuff while he's trying to kill you. It'd be really entertaining. And I honestly think the Leprechaun movies don't get enough love. I know they're silly. The third one is considered the best one. I think the next good one is probably the last one they made, Back to the Hood, from with Woodrick Davis was in. And yeah, I just think that'd be an awesome game. I mean, hopefully, I mean, they were trying to come out with a Child's Play video game, and even though that fell through, they still used the idea. So hopefully they could use something that's not licensed. I don't think the Leprechaun is a licensed product. But anyways, guys, that's my movie into game.
Another two great selections. So my next movie that I would love to have seen made into a game is also another 80s movie. It's one that I saw in the drive-in when I was a little kid, and I absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and that is the original Clash of the Titans. And it's another movie that would have made for a great game because there's just so much material in that movie that would have lent to a video game. You have a hero on a quest to save his love, and he has to fight a whole lot of stuff in order to make that happen. I can see it being an 8-bit NES game, sort of like Zelda 2 Adventures of Link, and also Battle of Olympus, where your character Perseus has to go on his quest to gather up certain items that will allow him to kill the Kraken, which is the creature that his girlfriend is going to be sacrificed to. And he also gets help along the way, some from some fellow soldiers, also from the gods. There's also some gods that are trying to impede his progress, which would also be a mechanic in there. So it'd be like a side-scrolling adventure game with some RPG elements mixed into it also, gathering experience points as you beat creatures, leveling up your character. You might want to go off on a little bit of a side quest, get some extra information, maybe find a hidden item that will help you out later on. There are so many Greek mythology creatures in this movie that each one would be set up as an awesome boss. You've got the scorpions, the multi-headed dog, you've got Medusa, you've got Calabas, and you would end up up fighting the Kraken as your last boss. And every time you beat one of them, you get a new piece of armor or weapon or whatever, like the shield, the helmet, the sword, bubo.
No! God, please, no!
And I honestly think that it was another one that was just completely looked over by video game companies. But then again, at the time that the movie came out, the Atari 2600 was the dominant console, and I don't think they could have done it any justice. So it would have been another ET-esque sort of game that's very cryptic, and you don't know what the hell you need to be doing in it. If the license was still strong in the mid to late 80s, I think it would have made a fantastic video game. So my next two guests are my fellow panel mates from the Midwest Gaming Classic Midwest YouTube Gamers panel, Church, the Game Grinder, and Jason of Corpse Flood Gaming.
Hey there, Church here of the Game Grinder, and thanks for having me again, Chris. And for a movie that I think would make an interesting game, I'm going with Tokyo Gore Police. Now, the basic premise of the film is the Tokyo Police Corporation have been privatized, and they kind of deal with criminals with an iron fist with harsh brutality. And primarily they're there to deal with this new criminal scourge called the Engineers, who are biomutated criminals that basically go berserk. And throughout the film, the main character Ruka, of course, is fighting some of these engineers and discovers some corruption within the department, and kind of all things go to hell. Eventually she becomes an engineer and takes down the chief of the police department, which then leads to a lot of possibilities for a potential sequel or a spin-off game. So since we're fantasizing here, I'm gonna kind of go crazy with this one. So I think the game would be a different title but have Tokyo Gore Police as a subtitle, and it would be a massive collab venture. I'd like to see From Software working on the level and enemy design, maybe more focus on the boss battles, with Platinum handling a majority of the gameplay. I'm kind of thinking something along the lines of a Dark Souls Bloodborne, but more fast-paced, maybe like Metal Gear Rising Revengeance or Nier Automata, and co-directed by Suda51 for his outlandish, crazy stories that he does, and with some supporting work of Hideo Kojima, because he makes some pretty awesome monologues and stories. I think with all these teams working together, it would make for a very interesting game. Now, how I kind of envision this is maybe some time has passed since the events of the film. Maybe Tokyo is kind of starting to fall into a state of ruin with this battle between the lingering corrupt police presence and the rising problem of the engineers. And stuck in between it is us, the player, and kind of where the story takes place. Of course, a cool thing that would have to be integrated into the game is the over-the-top, ridiculous, insane amounts of gore and blood. When you think I'm talking lots of blood and gore, I mean, you have no idea. If an arm gets cut off, it's seriously like somebody hooked up a fire hose and just sprays blood all over the place. Somehow that could blend into the game mechanics, but I'm not a game designer, so I don't have all its finer details. But with all these people involved, I think this could be something particularly special, unlike a lot of things we've seen before. Off-the-wall bonkers, yet a lot of fun.
Hey guys, Jason here from Corpse Flood Gaming, and I'm super excited to be here for part 2 of this video. I gave this topic a lot of thought, and I thought of a lot of really cool ideas for some really cool movies, and kept finding out that there was a super obscure game for these movies, and I didn't want to get called out, so I decided to go with a movie that I knew for sure didn't have a game. And I decided to go with a superhero movie, but it's kind of a different superhero movie. It's an adult superhero movie, and that is Orgazmo. Orgazmo is a movie that came out in 1997. It's from the creators of South Park, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, and it stars Trey Parker as a Mormon turned adult movie star turned superhero who has a ray gun that he wears on his arm that when he shoots people with it, they have orgasms, and that's how he incapacitates them. He has a sidekick named Chota Boy who has like a kind of utility belt of all types of like adult toys and stuff like that. And I think that would be like the best 2-player 16-bit beat 'em up ever. I think they'd have some really cool powers too. Like you could have him charge up his ray by beating like regular enemies, and then once he charges it up, his special ability could be using his ray gun. And Chota Boy has a fighting style in the movie that he refuses to use called hamster style. He just scratches at stuff, but I think it would be a hilarious special move for him too. All the other characters from the movie like would make really cool bosses. Neutered Man, who's impervious to Orgazmo's ray. The director of the film series Orgazmo in the movie, his name is Max Orbison, and he ends up stealing Orgazmo's girlfriend without spoiling too much of the movie, and Orgazmo has to go on a quest to get her back. So that's where he meets up with all these weird characters along the way, that are, a lot of them are like his co-stars from the film, but like in real life they're still these funny characters. All the characters in this movie would make awesome characters in a game. Like they're already, you know, cut out like superhero comic book characters, and yeah, I think it would be badass to see this as a game.
Two more awesome suggestions. I wouldn't expect any less from those two guys. So my next choice is one that is based on an obscure movie that I'm sure a lot of you have not heard of. But it was one of my favorite movies growing up. I was lucky enough to be able to see it in the movie theater in 3D, Star Chaser: The Legend of Oran. It was an animated film that came out in the mid-80s and was kind of like a ripoff of Star Wars, but it was just a ton of fun and I still love it to this day. It was about this slave boy that worked in the mines named Oran, who finds this hilt to a sword. It has no blade, but he is told by this like image that comes out of the sword that he has to find that blade by finding a way out of the mines to the surface world and exploring the galaxy. And he will become this Jedi-like character if he does. There is a lot of people that die to help him get there. It is really sad and depressing for an animated kids movie. And he meets up with all these really colorful characters, just like in Star Wars. And he goes on this epic adventure and discovers a robot conquest plot. It's awesome. You need to see it if you haven't already. And the game would be this mashup game where it would be a bunch of different genres mixed up into one. But there is outer space shoot-'em-up action in the movie. You would be taken on waves and waves of Zygon's fleet. There would also be on-foot levels where you would be Oran or Dag. I would assume that in certain situations you'd be able to pick which one you want to go with. Oran would be able to use the hilt, which whenever he gets angry tends to have a magical blade that just kind of appears out of nowhere, or Dag, where he would be able to use his blaster, taking out Zygon's ground forces as well as maybe mandroids in certain levels, black market smugglers, all the different characters that they run into over the course of the movie, culminating in one final battle with Zygon himself versus Oran, and whoop some robot ass. This came out like in the mid to late 80s, so I can see this being an NES game or an SNES game, maybe even a Sega Genesis game, probably more likely the Master System or the NES. But since the movie was kind of a huge flop and nobody really saw it, nobody really remembers it, except for me, that it probably wouldn't have made for a great license at the time. But I mean, it's gotten releases on DVD and all that, so I mean, there is some interest in it out there, so I think it would have made a great video game tie-in. So now let's hear from my next two guests, and these are the two guests whose channels have nothing to do with video games. So my friend Charlie, who I've known since junior high, is a huge tabletop gamer. Warhammer, Necromunda, all that stuff, and his channel focuses on that. And also Matt Zion of Wreckless Eating, who does eating challenges and food reviews, but he does stream video games on Twitch now and then, so I figured he'd be a great fit for this. So now let's hear from Charlie of Epic Die Studios and Matt Zion from Wreckless Eating.
Sorry. Charlie here from Epic Die Studio, helping my friend Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, with his topic of movies that would have made great video games. And I'm going to dive deep back into the 80s with an actor that I'm shocked hasn't been in a video game yet. Chuck Norris, the king of internet memes, needs his own game. And I think his 1980s series of films Missing in Action would make great first-person shooters combined with martial arts awesomeness. Start out with like a standard Call of Duty-esque engine, first-person shooter running through the Vietnamese jungles, searching for American POWs and blowing away the Viet Cong. Change your perspective button, and similar to Enter the Matrix, your guns just disappear, and you can get nice up and close and get a nice, you know, beat 'em up, punch, roundhouse kick of death. And as you progress to the boss battle, based on however the designers wrote the story, you'd have a, you know, gun battle versus a boss in a vehicle, or, you know, the game would automatically switch you back into that third person, or heck, maybe even a full like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter-esque, you know, Chuck Norris on one side and here's your big baddie, and you duke it out standard fighting game style. Progress through a bunch of micro missions, etc., and eventually eliminate the bad guys, and Chuck Norris is the hero that we all want him to be. Anyway, that's my choice. Thanks again, Chris, for having me on. I'm gonna go back to playing with my models.
Alright, hey, so Christopher asked me to hop on his channel, do a quick little segment here for a video he's making. He asked what I would pick a movie that I wish had a video game tie-in and never did, at least that I know it didn't, and if it did, not in the way that I wanted it to be. 13 Ghosts! This is a really fun, schlocky horror film from back in the day, my childhood, and it's really, I mean, the concept would really lend well to a video game, because the idea is that you go into this house, there's 13 ghosts inside, and you have to survive each of them one at a time. It'd make for a really cool survival horror game. Probably better than the movie actually is, because it's actually not a good movie. It's just so much fun. But I think that the colorful characters, like, there's more time to really help the colorful characters and monsters in this movie be translated into a game, because it's like you got like the stabby chick, you got the my personal favorite, the dude that's inside like a little like crazy asylum cage. It's fun, and I think that would make for a fun game. Obviously that trade has sailed, but that's what I would pick, 13 Ghosts.
Those two choices actually sound very, very fun to me. I would love a 13 Ghosts game. That sounds fantastic. So my next choice is a movie that I don't think has held up very well over the years, but when I first saw it, when it came out in the mid-90s, I was like totally all about it. I thought it was fantastic. It's Broken Arrow. It was a John Woo film. And I loved it back in the day. Now I watch it and I kind of cringe, kind of like I do towards all of John Woo's movies nowadays. But it would make for a fantastic run and gun. You'd be playing as Christian Slater's character, who's going after John Travolta's character, who is a traitor to the government and is stealing a nuclear bomb. It would be sort of like Contra, because I could totally see this being a Super Nintendo / Sega Genesis game, where you would get to select which character you want to play as. You could either play as Christian Slater or Samantha Mathis, the park ranger. Each of them will be carrying a gun, and you would get upgraded guns as you go along, you know, pick up different power-ups like in Contra. Taking on all of the different soldiers that John Travolta's character would be throwing at you. You got helicopters that be coming after you. You got Humvees, all the different scenarios. One level you have to be trying to get that nuclear bomb into the bottom of that mine before it goes off and kills everybody. You'd be fighting through the mountain range, the mines, the train, and then with a final showdown with John Travolta's character, that's where it would turn into a one-on-one fighting game. Once in a while when you'd hit a boss, like you'd fight Howie Long, it would turn into like a one-on-one fighting game where it would be about punching each other, because the boxing rivalry between John Travolta and Christian Slater's character was kind of a big part of the movie, so I think that would have to be mixed in there too to make it more true to the film. There'd obviously be cutscenes where you'd find out different parts of the plot, the romance between Samantha Mathis and Christian Slater's character would kind of develop, and of course you've got all the weird John Woo action moments that would make for fantastic video game moments. If this was made for the 16-bit consoles, I can see that certain moments would slow down as you'd be like shooting at people, or if this was made for, say, the PlayStation or the Sega Saturn, it would be like a 3D run and gun, and it would be kind of like Max Payne, where you can like slow time down and shoot at people while you're jumping or ducking or tucking and rolling. And of course, a dove would have to fly through the frame at some point in the game, because John Woo. Obviously, people would be dual-wielding guns. There'd be some sort of a standoff where two people have guns pointed at each other's face. All the John Woo cliches would have to be in there at some point, just because. There was never a game based on a John Woo movie, from what I can remember. I mean, there was never a Face Off or a Mission Impossible 2 or a Paycheck.
Ew.
So yes, Broken Arrow sounds like it would make for an awesome run and gun. It could still happen. Probably not. And now for my final two guests. Both have been on the channel before. John Riggs and Michael B. the Game Genie. And Michael B. the Game Genie's video is probably my favorite out of all of these because I didn't have to do any editing to it. Thanks, dude.
So I'm thinking about great 80s movies, iconic movies, classic movies, movies that everyone knows of, movies that everyone thinks about, that could have been made into a video game. And one game I thought of would be Revenge of the Nerds. Now, how are you going to turn Revenge of the Nerds into a video game? Well, you do the panty raid scene, make it into a stealth adventure game, and the purpose is to sneak into the female sorority and steal as many panties as you can before getting caught. It'd make $1 million, I promise you that.
Hey everyone, Michael B. the Game Genie here. Chris asked me to take part in this video to talk about a great movie that would have made a great game. And it was an easy selection for me. As soon as Chris mentioned it, I knew exactly what I was going to pick, because this is something I thought about a lot when I was a kid, so really easy to do. My great movie that I think would make a great game is actually Tremors. I love the movie Tremors. It was one of my favorite movies growing up. I don't know why, it just kind of caught with me. I mean, the idea of not being able to get on the ground. I mean, it's the ultimate movie. The floor is made of lava, right? And The bad guys seem really cool. The graboids. Were they called graboids, or was that just the tentacles that came from them? I can't remember. Kevin Bacon, the other characters, Bert the dad from Family Ties. I mean, it was amazing. So, Tremors is the movie I picked. Why do I think it would make a great game? I don't have a good reason for that. I just really like Tremors, so I'd like to see a game based on Tremors. That was it. Tremors on the NES. What would the game play like? Well, this is where it gets a little bit weird. It's going to have to be one of those multi-genre games, basically. So the majority of the game that I see is actually really weird. It's kind of like a running game, like Back to the Future, but instead of just running up a street, you run over different courses that are taken from elements of the movie, where basically you run and you have to go from periods where you're standing on something, like running on something, to then having a short time period where you can run on the ground, where, you know, the tentacles come out at you and you have to stop certain times when they're coming around. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job explaining this, but that's the idea. So it's constantly a scrolling runner where you have to jump from platform to platform and try to stay off the ground as much as possible. Another facet of the game would be just a regular platformer where it actually kind of scrolls up, and kind of like the store stage. So you remember where they had to get to the roofs in the town before they could actually, you know, hide out there. They were stuck in the grocery store. So the idea would be, the level will be the grocery store, and you have to climb up different facets of the grocery store to get up to the roof, the whole while tremors are coming out of the floor trying to get you. And last but not least, it's a good old-fashioned rail shooter, and I love this idea. The scene that probably I remember the most, well, second most, from Tremors is when Bert and his wife Reba McEntire are in their basement, and the graboid comes busting through the wall, and they actually have to shoot it with the guns. So yeah, you take all three of those elements, mix them together, and somehow, through the magic of video game, the smorgasbord will become a good representation of the movie, and hopefully a pretty fun NES game.
Revenge of the Nerds has an Atari 2600 game. Yeah, that'd be like the Porky's Atari game. But Tremors, that would be fantastic. I would love to see that as a game. Great ideas from both of you. So my final game would be based on a movie that's not exactly super popular, but I've always liked it basically because it's so sick and twisted and visually super impressive. It came out in 2000. It was a movie called The Cell. It had a crazy, kooky central plot where Vincent D'Onofrio played this really nutty serial killer who was kidnapping women and turning them into sex objects. He has like a seizure and goes into a coma, and he had already kidnapped a new girl and has her locked away somewhere. The police need to find out where she is. So Jennifer Lopez is this psychiatrist who's developed this new technique where she can actually project herself into somebody's mind so she can figure out what's wrong with her patients. Obviously, the police bring D'Onofrio's body to her, and she puts herself inside his mind, and craziness ensues. So this, I think, would have to be a first-person horror game. Picture survival horror walking simulator mixed together. There's this new game that just came out for the PS4 called Agony, which is exactly that. It's like a walking simulator through hell, and I can totally see that being what The Cell would be like. It'd be like a walking simulator through this crazy serial killer's mind. You see all these metaphors for different parts of his life that have affected him psychologically. You'd see his id and his ego and his superego as all these different characters. You'd actually find like his child version of himself where all the trauma started when he was little. There'd be conversations that you would have with these characters and conversation trees. You'd have to pick the right response to what's being asked of you in order to progress. And I can also see the game having multiple endings because of that aspect alone. There is a possibility where you could become trapped inside his mind forever, because in the movie, if the person who's injected themselves into the other person's mind starts to believe what they're seeing is reality, they can become trapped in there forever. So that would be a serious issue that you'd have to deal with, where you have to carefully pick what you're going to do in each scenario in order to get out alive and not become trapped inside this other person's brain. Of course, there would have to be some action beats in it, because there are characters that do attack the main characters in the movie, like the bodybuilder chick and all the different versions of D'Onofrio's character inside his mind. So I can see it being sort of like Alien Isolation, where in some situations you'd have to run and hide, in other situations you'd have to fight. I think it would be a fun, fascinating type of game that would be scary, thrilling, and action-packed at the same time. As long as the tension is kept up throughout, I think it would be amazing. The only issue you'd have to get past is that you'd be playing a game based on a Jennifer Lopez movie. Just be happy we never got a Made in Manhattan game. Yeah. So I want to thank all 10 of my awesome guests for participating in this awesome collaboration. It did take a while to get this one going compared to the first one, but I think it was completely worthwhile. Everyone offered their own awesome perspective on this topic. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedules to participate. So of course I want to throw this topic out to you viewers as well and fellow YouTubers. What is a movie that you always wished had a video game tie-in? Let me know in the comments below. I'm sure the rest of my guests would be interested in finding out what you have to say. And if you're a YouTuber, make a response video. Let's see what you think would have made for a great video game based on a movie. And also, if you really love this topic as much as I do and want to see another collaboration video about it, let me know and I will gather up another 10 YouTubers to talk about it with me. So I want to say thank you once again to all my fellow collaborators. And until next time, I'm Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, signing off.